He is arguably still the most hated man in New York. Bernie Madoff defrauded investors out of billions of dollars, all while living the extravagant life with his family. But now that he's in jail, where is his wife Ruth? Well, Jason Matera tracked her down not too far from here.
Get away from me.
Ruth Madoff sure wasn't happy to see Crime Watch Daily at her doorstep. She's like a lioness growling in her den.
Get away from me.
Decorated with a Thanksgiving turkey tacked to the front door. She's the wife of notorious Wall Street swindler Bernie Madoff. Bernie is in prison for stealing billions from investors who trusted him with their retirement money, leaving many destitute and desperate, even suicidal.
Many of us think of suicide. I'm 65, and I believe, tragically, that there are many like me who will succumb, who will not survive this ordeal.
I wish he could just give back as much of the money as possible, and that would have a positive result.
Now that's happening. Many victims are finally getting restitution. 7 years after it was revealed, Madoff bled them dry. We wanted to get Ruth's reaction to that.
You want to say anything, Mrs. Madoff, to your husband's victims? They're receiving compensation now. What do you have to say? You happy? You enjoy it?
My intention was not to upset Mrs. Madoff, but she definitely wasn't happy to see me. But before the cameras were rolling, she actually started swinging at me. We turned the cameras on and continued asking her the questions. Flat out refused to answer and was visibly annoyed.
Seriously, Mrs. Madoff, you're going to attack me? After your husband ran a $65 billion Ponzi scheme. I'm just saying what you think of the victims finally getting some money back. And you start swinging your bag at me?
I was surprised to see where she was living. It was a far cry from her Manhattan penthouse days and life of opulence. Now she's about an hour outside the city in this small townhouse community.
Do you still talk to Mr. Madoff?
Ruth is paying a reported $3,000 a month for this 2-bedroom apartment in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, 35 miles and a galaxy away from the lavish Upper East Side where she and Bernie lived large before he traded his penthouse for the penitentiary.
I don't see a wedding ring on. Are you still married to him?
In his heyday, Madoff was the king of Wall Street, a stock-picking genius, the chairman of the NASDAQ stock exchange. He made millions legitimately, but made billions through fraud and deceit. Madoff admits he ran a giant Ponzi scheme, using money from new clients to pay off the old ones. Ruth was never charged in connection with her husband's fraud. In a rare appearance, she told NBC's The Today Show she was clueless about her husband's business.
Did you see nothing, Ruth?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
People lost everything because of her husband, but Ruth wasn't interested in answering any questions. In fact, my biggest surprise is that she wasn't even contrite or remorseful. I mean, she wasn't even indifferent. She was irate that we were asking her some basic questions about her Ponzi schemer husband. Mind-boggling. In the end, billions lost and people's lives and savings completely destroyed. Madoff pled guilty to 11 felony counts and was sentenced to 150 years in the federal pen. At his sentencing, he apologized to his victims, saying, "I am responsible for a great deal of suffering and pain. I understand that. I live in a tormented state now, knowing all the pain and suffering I have created." And just like Bernie's victims, Ruth has had her share of tragedy. In a television interview, Ruth claimed that after the fraud was exposed, she and Bernie made a suicide pact and downed a bunch of pills. She says they fell asleep on the 4-poster bed in their penthouse, hoping to slip into death. But they woke up the next morning. 2 years to the day after Bernie was arrested, their son Mark committed suicide by hanging. Their other son died from cancer. Life is very different for Ruth these days. She now blends into the suburban community driving a 5-year-old silver Toyota Prius. We also spotted Ruth wearing the same jacket, shopping at this CVS pharmacy in Greenwich, and the Daily Mail caught Ruth at this IKEA store near her apartment, where she seems to be on a quest for a new interior design. snapping a pic of an end table, looking at storage units she can assemble herself, and taking careful measurements. A world away from the wood-paneled library and lavish dining room in the penthouse Ruth once called home. Ruth still has a nice place to live. She was allowed to keep $2.5 million from her husband's ill-gotten gains, but the feds took the rest away, and money confiscated from his crimes is being used to pay back victims. Bernie will live the rest of his life behind bars with a 150-year sentence. Ruth, forever imprisoned by their infamy.
It's certainly a wild story fit for the screen, and would you believe the Madoff story is now being made into a much-anticipated TV movie called The Wizard of Lies. Robert De Niro will play Bernie and Michelle Pfeiffer will play Ruth. It will air next year on HBO.